Well, hello everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I suppose maybe good night to the night owls as well who are joining us, wherever you may be, somewhere across our lovely world. Thanks so much for joining us here live today for the one and only Serverless Office Hours. We are streaming on the AWS Twitch channel, YouTube, and via LinkedIn Live. So thank you wherever you are joining us from. My name is Julian Wood. I'm a developer advocate here for Serverless at AWS, and I'm joined by the wonderful, I can only say, Dhiraj Mahapatro, who's a principal solutions architect, which means he is super guru stuff. He knows awesome kind of things, and so it's awesome to have you. Welcome back to Serverless Office Hours, Dhiraj. How are you?
Thank you, Julian. I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm good,
Long
thank
time.
you.
Feels like a long
Yes,
time. We have been there for some time, but
I
again,
know.
whenever
So
there's a
tell us
good
for
topic, I
people.
jump on.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to talk
No,
over you,
go
but
ahead.
yeah, tell us for people who may not know the awesomeness of Dhiraj is how you've landed up being a solutions architect at AWS and what you work on a day-to-day basis at the
Yeah, yeah,
moment.
great. In fact, I just completed 5 years in Amazon
Wow.
yesterday.
Oh
So
wow! Oh yes, I did see that. Congratulations! I
yeah,
think I'm a
thank
few
you.
weeks behind you, so yeah, we're
Nice,
I'll
nice.
following
Congratulations
your
on the
trails.
lineup. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I joined Amazon in 2019 as a professional services uh, cloud application architect, and um, global financial services are the set of customers that I had worked with right from the beginning. The journey has been tremendously good. A lot of learnings, a lot of evangelizing, a lot of thought leadership, a lot of building applications hands-on when in professional services. It has been a great experience working with different set of customers, having different set of problems, but eventually they converge to what kind of compute should I use, whether I should use
Yeah.
Lambda function or a Fargate, or how should I design my applications. So that's the beauty of being a solutions architect. When you take a problem and you have a plethora of services that you want to make sure customers use them and get the most benefit out of it, not just what I preach. But going away from professional services side of the world, I moved into this specialist architect role, solutions architect, where my focus was on just serverless. When I say serverless, I know we talk about Lambda functions, API gateways, step functions, etc. But the core part that helped me keep moving was to figure out when not to say that Lambda is a good solution. So even if I'm a specialist in Lambda or API gateway or step functions, should be cognizant of figuring out when Lambda might not be a good solution, and instead suggest customers use something like Fargate or EKS. So that's what is very exciting in this role. And I don't know how 5 years just went past, but it's still day one for me.
Yeah, COVID was in the middle, so I think time just elongated and went wrong. And big tech
Yes.
companies like Amazon, I think it's like dog years. So it's probably
Hmm.
feels like 35 years. We'll be getting back to Dhiraj with all of our information, with all of the information he's talking about. But just to talk about briefly the past week of serverless at AWS. Last week's stream, we had the product manager for EventBridge, Nick Smith himself, on the stream, literally talking about how EventBridge works under the hood. Fascinating talk, some really interesting architectural choices that they've made to reduce latency. They're even swapping out some services. EventBridge is built on a lot of other AWS primitives, and some cool discussions and really nerdy deep dives on learning about how they have drastically improved latency and some of the plans going forward. So that's on our Serverless Land YouTube channel, along with many all the other previous Serverless Office Hours. In terms of what's new, just the second one down, S3 has finished rolling out the no longer charging for several HTTP error codes. So this has been going on for a while. S3 is a big service, so we've been rolling this out carefully across the world. So yeah, this is great. Super great that, I think the people in S3 would acknowledge that probably we shouldn't have been charging in the beginning, and these things sort of happen, but it's really cool that S3 is actually very quickly able to turn that around. And so yeah, you don't get charged for people trying to access incorrect things from your site. And then the top one literally just came out, Lambda recursive loop detection. So if you build a Lambda recursive loop, you read something from S3, put it back onto S3, we read something from SQS, put it on the same SQS queue, that can cause a loop. Well, Lambda automatically disables that currently for SNS and SQS, and is looking to roll that out for S3. But to make things simpler to control that, we now have a new API that you can turn that on or off for an individual function. So generally, you would never need this. You should not have recursive loops, but some people do have some special reasons for doing this. And so this is something that you can now configure on a per function level, which will be helpful. And yet, James, the guy, the product manager, and Anil Murari have put together a blog to explain all of that. And yeah, it's a little bit longer before, but of course, we had a blog from the awesome Dhiraj about step functions with customer managed keys. So, anything to do with security is always super important. And customer managed keys has been high on the list, and great to see that out. It is AWS Summit season at the moment. The next one is Johannesburg, 29th of August. And yeah, a few little summits carrying on until the end of the year. Free technical events, awesome to attend to, thousands of people, loads of breakout sessions, workshops, talks, everything. It really is a fantastic day going all over the world. A little bit closer to home, well, at least for me, being in Europe, is EDA Day, Event-Driven Architectures Day. I know Dhiraj has spoken at a previous EDA Day before. We'll be heading to Warsaw on the 19th of September. I will be there along with a whole bunch of other colleagues, and we're going to be diving deep into event-driven architectures, all the benefits, all the cool things, teasing it all apart, helping you understand how that all works. So yeah, sign up. We'd love to see you there. And of course, the big show happening at the end of the year, AWS reInvent. It's actually, I think, a little sort of a week later in the calendar. You can see it's now starting in December, beginning of December, not at the end of November. But yeah, I will be there. Dhiraj is going to be there. You doing some talks as well. So am I. So yeah, reInvent is the big show. Everyone's putting a whole bunch of work together. They, of course, going to be maybe some product announcements. They're going to be talks and workshops and things to sign up. So yeah, I've done reInvent for a number of years. I find it a fantastic event to attend, even when I was attending before I was an employee, when it's part of the job description to go. But before I went, I absolutely loved it. So I would suggest, if you haven't been, certainly it'd be great to be there and come and say hi. But this week we are talking about the world of GenAI and this thing called function calling with serverless. So, Dhiraj, over to you. What are we talking about today? Before you jump in, sorry, I forgot to say, remember, we are live. Please send us your questions, send us your comments, about this or other serverless topics. Please let us know where you are. We love to hear from various kind of people. Daniel always joining us. Thank you. Appreciate it, from Brazilian Sao Paulo. So yeah, it's always great to see how broad and global the serverless community is. So yeah, sorry about that, Dhiraj.
No problem. No problem at all. It's good to see everybody joining from across the globe. I know large language models or GenAI is not a new topic anymore. It has become an ubiquitous topic all across. Everybody talks about GenAI and large language models, but this particular topic interests me because it involves some engineering apart from prompt engineering, and that engineering can be helpful for integrating existing business logic with how LLMs behave.
So is that the sort of use case you're talking about, where you obviously, I think people understand GenAI, and then they also understand that GenAI has a lot of different moving parts to it, and obviously the real bit of GenAI is when you can use your own data and then connect it to your own systems and bring them all together to come back with some kind of prompt.
Yes, the way we use current organizational data or own data today with LLMs is using something like RAG, so retrieval augmented generation. That makes large language models have specific knowledge about your organization, how to answer questions that is specific to your organization or your own custom data. This function calling, or it's also called tool use, is one step above that, where you can use your own data. On top of that, you can use your own APIs. So if you have your own APIs that takes a request and sends a dynamic response based on the request, now LLMs can use that functionality and you can build something out of it. Now, in the example that I'm going to walk through, it talks about a particular business use case in private aviation company, but it is not limited to private aviation. It can be used anywhere you feel like you can have large language models integrated with APIs.
So should people think about this as a sort of three maybe layer approach? You've got your base LLMs, which you simply send it a prompt and you get back information, but that information can only come from when the LLM was trained. Any new information or your custom information, it doesn't know. You mentioned the RAG, so this is uploading or uploading a PDF or your website or your processes or your API spec or any kind of thing which you upload somewhere, and then you basically the RAG process takes information out of that information and stores it in an LLM friendly way, using a vectorized database, my
Yes.
understanding. But this is sort of one level above that. It's like, okay, cool, you've got your data, but there's a lot more other places that you need to
Hmm.
connect to an API, maybe depending on the request that you need to then pull in various bits of information, orchestrate this, connect this all together, and then ultimately provide a much sort of more robust and helpful response. So this
Yes.
orchestration layer, is that what the sort of function calling is, or is that what when we call about GenAI tools, are those the sort of tools that in effect you're building the sort
Exactly.
of bunch of tools that are all connect together to be
Yes.
able to pull things
Yes.
together?
Yes. Even before jumping to function calling or tool use, there is a concept of agents.
Yeah.
Agents does that orchestration for you today. So we'll go through what agent does and what are the benefits of using agents, and then where you might need to go one step above agents and build something like this yourself using function calling. So you're absolutely correct. In the base case, LLM, you ask a question, it gives an answer based on what it has been trained on. And if you want something specific to your organization, you either fine tune the large language model or provide external data as vector stores using RAG. And then when you want some dynamic nature that has to happen with respect to large language models, that's where agents or tool use comes into picture. And we'll dive deeper on where you can use agents and when you can think about function calling and tools, and why step functions becomes a good replacement or a good way to orchestrate, where you get a visual confirmation about what is going on,
Mm.
and you can get more error handling and more troubleshooting capabilities. So that's the whole progression of how you would like to
Okay.
use LLMs going forward and in organizations.
Because I
um,
suppose you could write all these agents in code, or you could either write the agents or connect all the agents in code as well, which would be a big Lambda function or something on
yes,
Fargate, even on your laptop.
exactly.
But obviously, step functions has got all its advantages of SDK calls and error handling and retries and a visual interface, and that's what sort of makes the secret sauce uh, to make this all a bit easier to consume and create, I
That's
suppose.
that's absolutely correct.
Cool. Okay.
You can use tools in LangChain, and you can create everything inside one Lambda function, or you can write everything in your Fargate code using a Python script. You can make everything work. But the whole process of how you can invoke the LLM recursively and call. In case of Bedrock, there are two APIs that are available today. One is a invoke API, and one is a converse API. So you can use the converse API to do all of those things, and it supports tool. Whether you are using agents or not, it supports tool. So we'll see how does it work, and then with an example, I think I can categorically go to one place where I can show you the power of how using this with step function helps. But
Perfect.
before that, I pasted a link.
Yes, let me bring that
Uh,
up. I do. It's also while we're here, because I love asking the kind of questions that I
mhm,
know some people have asked, and I also don't know as well. It's the reason I do serverless office hours is to learn from the experts as well. Um, so the difference for some people who, and me partly know about the Bedrock API and the Converse API. If you would just use the Bedrock API, you would send a request, you get a response. You would then have to send the history of your original request, and would just get bigger and bigger and bigger.
mhm,
So because each time the Bedrock API responds, it doesn't know anything that's happened before, and so you've
exactly.
got to sort of keep adding to the query to say, remember what I said before? Well, that also
Mhm,
applies. Here was your previous response. Now let me ask, and that back
yep,
and forth. And the Converse API now makes it into a proper conversation that you no longer have to, provide your previous history.
exactly. So the catch here is step functions doesn't support Converse API natively today.
Okay.
We can still use Converse API. For that, I have to write a Lambda function inside a step function
Ah,
and pass those information back. However, you can do the same thing in the invoke API, what you can do with Converse API, and pass on the context as much as you get.
yeah,
And why it is easy to do the same thing in function calling is because we are passing a relatively smaller context back
yeah.
to Bedrock compared to what agents
Mm,
does. So this is the link that has been pasted here is the blog that I was referring to, which talks about
mm,
a private aviation use case. The reason I chose private aviation is because I have experience in that. Before joining AWS, I was part of a private aviation company. I was building
I thought you were going to say I own a fleet of private jets. So
I did actually. I flew the jets multiple times, and it was a breeze. It was a good experience, but I cannot complain right now. So there, I had the trade off. Should I keep
exactly.
should I keep going in private jets, or should I join AWS? And
Wow.
my son always compares that to me and says that you made a wrong choice by giving up on private jets. But then
Cool.
he realizes now when I
Cool.
go
Well, then,
online.
yeah, the link is in the chat as well, and also if you're watching the recording, then it is in the stream notes as well. So I appreciate that's quite a long, long URL to type in. So yeah, it's going to be in the stream notes as well.
Yeah, the comparison of private jets, booking private jets compared to commercial jets, that's the most important part. So commercial jets, they always have a schedule. They can, exactly on September 10th what kind of flight will be flying from 9 a.m. Like from a location to a different location. So you already have almost a static schedule. So you know that you'll be able to book this, and the aviation company also will know that, okay, we'll have X number of customers going from place A to place B. On the contrary, private aviation is not like that. So that's why customers pay a higher price tag on booking a private jet for the comfortability and the dynamic nature of flying private jets. So from my experience, what I've seen is customers can call today right now and say that I want to fly from point X to point Y in 5 hours. And now the private aviation company has to scramble around to figure out whether there is a jet available at point X. And if there is none, then how can we fly an empty jet to that place so the customer can fly? What food would they prefer on the jet? What kind of ground transportation would they need from their home to the airport, so on and so forth. So it's very dynamic in nature. So when it becomes very dynamic in nature, customers, high profile customers like these, they won't be sitting around and talking to an agent for half an hour to book a jet. So it has to be very quick. Either the personal assistant has to call and make sure that the aviation company has enough context, enough information of the customer or owner to figure out when and how would they fly from place A to place B and get the reservation done in as minimal time as possible. So the context that will be given will be very minimal. So somebody can call and say, Mr. John Doe is going to fly with his family to Disney World in 5 hours. Can you book a reservation? You take that context and figure out how and where the departure airport will be, what will be the arrival airport, who all are there in the family, is everybody flying from the family, and what should be the jet that has to be picked up, does the jet have enough seats to cover, so and so forth. All of the planning, all of the uh, weather reports, all of the logistics has to happen way before that. But since the turnaround time is 4 to 5 hours, it has to be very succinct, and it has to be very lucid in a manner that it has doesn't hamper any other experience going forward. So what this would help in this scenario, like when you get a request like that, Mr. John Doe has to travel to Disney World for a surprise trip in 5 hours, then you can bring in the power of large language models to figure out actually what is the additional context that we can get from that much of information. So you will definitely need, you cannot go and look at RAG, or you cannot go and look at documents to figure out that data. It has to be your existing APIs where you can strip out information from that particular text or whatever voice command it has come, go and figure out what is the owner information, and then immediately go and figure out what are the passengers that will be flying, and then finally book a reservation. So the blog talks about what tools it has to use, and how can you go from this minimalistic information provided in the beginning and actually create a payload that actually will go and book a reservation.
Yeah, so
But
that's
before,
ultimately the challenge of having unstructured data.
yeah,
And this could be a phone call, a transcripted phone call, or an email, or this kind of thing. And taking context from that entirely unstructured data and building up some sort of event object or something, or some sort of schema that tells you, family members and source and destinations and all that kind of things. And of course, you're talking about private aviation, but this could be booking a restaurant. It could be, I want to go on a beach holiday that's going to have good weather next week and isn't too far to fly. So like very
exactly.
vague information, and or something could go in and can go and grab a bunch of information and put
Yeah.
together a real actual request.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That being said, LLMs are still non-deterministic in nature,
Yeah.
so we cannot fully rely on giving
Yeah.
them accurate information all the time. But it's a good start where we can figure out how LLMs behave and do extensive testing around that with enough scenarios that we have talked about. So if I can share my screen.
Yeah, certainly.
Yep, no problem. So before we jump into actual function calling and what the blog talks about, I want to dive deeper on what agents do today. You might already know that Bedrock agents are available. You can test it out. And what agents workflow actually does is if you have a task and you send it to the agent understands what should be the prompt, what are the conversation history, what actions it has to take. Does it have to talk to any knowledge bases? What instructions has to be taken? What are the tasks in hand? And agent will be talking to the Bedrock model or the LLM on your behalf. The reason agent abstracts the discussion because agents will have the power to create this chain of thought and figure out what step has to be executed after what. So you'll after so if you take the same example, like Mr. John Doe has to fly to Disney World in 5 hours with his family for a surprise trip, then it has to go and figure out what actually are my chain of thoughts, what are the steps that I have to do in order to get an actual reservation booked. So the whole setup relies on what kind of prompt system prompts that has been provided and what are the tools that are provided to the agents. So tool is a concept for both agents, and tool is also a concept for function calling. The only difference we'll see is in this case, Bedrock agent will be the one which orchestrates everything. But in the case of function calling, we are taking that abstraction away from Bedrock agents and we are doing it ourselves for some good reasons. I'll show you what are those good reasons. So let's take if agent is doing that today, it has to break down the prompt. It has to figure out what are my steps that I have to do. Agents can also make API calls. It can call an action group, grabs result. Once it gets the results back, now the context window has grown up. Exactly what Julian you were saying, that this context window grows up with every response from an API call. Now agent has to call Bedrock and saying that can you take a look at this context and tell me what are my next steps. So that context window keeps on growing based on the output that each of the step provides. But ultimately, once step n is executed, and if agent figures out there are no more steps to execute, it will finally ask the Bedrock model one last time, saying that here are the tasks and these are the results that we got. Can you go and summarize with everything and give me back a final response? And that final response is sent back. Now you can imagine for a user from this block which says Bedrock agent to all the way in the right, it's kind of a black box. They'll not know what exactly going on behind the scenes because agent takes care of orchestrating the whole work. So if you see that as if you take the booking a private jet example and do this sequence diagram, if a customer calls and saying I'm planning a surprise trip for my family to Disney World in 4 or 5 hours, book a reservation to your app, and that app actually needs to send back a reservation confirmation. In this case, if you are using agents, you ask the general question to that application and then you engineer the prompt and send it to agent. But whatever agent does in the right hand side, calling an LLM, calling an API, doing a search, talking to a knowledge base, etc., is totally abstracted away from your application. You just have to provide instructions to the model and ask the agent to get this done for me, and ultimately you get back a response. On the contrary, what we are trying to say with agent, like this is what agent workflow looks like. So, sorry, it's not the contrary. This is the agent workflow, and we'll see how the function calling works. In case of agent, you ask the app, and app sends a prompt to the agent saying that these are my available tools. Get owner information, get passenger, and book reservation are the ones which you can use. Go ahead and book a reservation for me. And agent is the one which actually talks to LLM, invokes an API on your behalf. It actually invokes your API, gives back the result, and invokes other APIs as part of the tool, and sends back those results altogether after reconciling everything. I'm sorry for the animation. The animation is jumbled up. This is something this I had to build pretty recently, so I did not take care of the animation. But overall, this is how it looks like.
So, I mean, the point is that your LLM is well, your agent is contacting three different APIs to
Yeah,
enhance the information that it's got.
exactly. So agent is working on behalf of you. It's similar to a booking agent when you give them a call and they do everything. Um, in this case, when LLM says that for me for this reservation to be booked properly, you have to go and fetch owner information first. So agent goes and invokes the owner API. Once the result is confirmed, it takes that context, the prompt, and what are the available tools, and then asks LLM, what should I do next? What are the next steps? LLM checks that and says, okay, now you have the owner information. Go and get the passenger because you need the passenger information to get the reservation booked. And then agent goes and calls passenger API, so on and so forth. Finally, when all of the informations are available, LLM decides, okay, now we have enough information. Uh, you can go ahead and invoke the booking API and send back a response. Right, so this is what agent does. Now, the area where it becomes difficult is not just on simple queries like this, where agent has to go and talk to multiple tools, more than three or four, and this blue line becoming a black box for the end user, right? So you don't know how it interacts, whether the context window is overflown, or whether if there is any error, should I be able to troubleshoot properly? How can I know which actual call has failed? So that becomes very difficult to handle, and that's where function calling comes into picture. So there will be cases where you will need agents in some scenarios to abstract away everything, but there will also be cases where you want to have the control what agent has today onto yourself, right? So you want to orchestrate that app. So let's say some logged in user is asking the same question to an app. The app actually sends the prompt to LLM and asks the question saying that based on whatever has been asked, just tell me the name of the tool that I want to use. You don't have to invoke any tool for me. Just tell me the name of the tool I have to use. And the large language model will be able to just tell you, you know what, based on this question, you might have to start with calling owner's API. I'm not going to call it for you. You have to make sure that you get owner's information first. And that's what it gives you. Here I have mentioned as book reservation. Assume that owner's information, passenger information has already been provided. Finally, the LLM will say, okay, now that you have owner's information and the passenger information, you can go ahead and book. Overall, what happens when you get information like this, you take the ownership of actually figuring out what the payload should be and how should you call the API. The beauty of this setup is that the LLM can provide you the payload. That's the most powerful part of this whole setup. We'll see how it does. I'll show you an example in the console in step functions. But overall, the contrasting feature here is since the LLM is returning back just the name of the tool every time you ask a question, the the response token size will always be small. It'll never be overblown. So when it just says that you have to take the action called book reservation, that's it. That would be the LLM response. It won't say three or four paragraphs and say that this is what I have decided, now you do next. It won't do that. It'll just say based on what you have provided me, this is the action that you have to take. So the max token size for response drastically reduces. On top of that, the application orchestrating this knows exactly what kind of orchestration is happening, and we'll see that in the console. and knows exactly where, if anything, has failed. Okay, right now, let me jump to the console real quick.
While you're
Uh,
switching on, we just got a question from Schizophrenic Web Developer. Thanks for joining us via Twitch.
mhm.
This like conversational AI chatbots? That was, I
uh,
mean, I don't even think in the technology, but conceptually it is a back and forth conversation.
Similar to that, the way you want to build it, it can be a conversational AI chatbot or just a one-time call where the
Yeah,
LLM takes care of it. So if the LLM says, and you can configure this in the LLM as a parameter. If the LLM would say that I don't have enough information, can you provide me some more information? And if it is a conversational chatbot, that question can be passed back to the end user,
yeah,
and the end user can provide the information. Now you add that information to the context.
yeah.
So it can be a conversational AI chatbot, and in some of the cases, the LLM will orchestrate, or you orchestrate and figure out yourself that you have enough information and you can send back the response. I think this example will make it pretty clear.
Cool.
Okay, I have a state machine. You can see, are we sharing the state machine? Okay.
Yes, we are.
Is it visible? Should I magnify
Yes,
this?
if you can go in one more, that's always a bit easier. But I know with step functions, there's a lot on the screen. So yeah, that's probably good, I think. Well, let us know in the comments if you need us to zoom in some more. But I think we're there.
Okay. So we saw agents. Agents will be orchestrating on your behalf. What I did is I went with step functions and I did not use agents but use function calling. I'll show the definition that makes it clear why function calling. So maybe I should start with the definition. That way it will be clear. So in the definition, when I have the where I have the bedrock model, my goal is to return back to the model with enough information so that the model can respond. So I'm using invoke model. Converts API is not yet supported in step function, but I'm natively integrating with Bedrock from step functions, and but I'm calling invoke model. I'm using Claude Sonnet, and I'm passing the max token as 1024. It won't go above 1024. I provide a system prompt saying that you are an AI assistant that helps owners booking the private jets. And I provide enough information as few shots prompting, saying that you'll get airport code starting with K, you'll get ICAO codes, you'll get IATA codes, you'll get things like 5 days from now, and you should convert that to a proper date format. So all those few shots prompting has been passed as system prompts to the model. And then invoke API also allows you to pass the information about the tools. Now, the beauty about this is since you pass tools, the most important part, I think, from coming from a developer background, we have never thought about adding descriptions to any of our code or any of our writings of code. But this is where it defies. This is where we have to change that mentality coming from a developer background.
That is such
So
an interesting point to think about. The descriptions in your code is what you would tell an LLM to do, or the
exactly,
instructions. Wow.
yeah. So
Take note, people.
this description that you add for the tool is what helps LLM decide what would be the right tool that has to be executed next. So be as descriptive as possible when you're writing tools or system prompts. The thing that I joke about is large language models are the smartest kid in your home, but they don't know to provide answers until and unless you ask them questions thoroughly and explain things thoroughly. So uh, here is the tool which says get owner info, and the description says take the owner ID and provide the detailed information of the owner, including their home airport, first name, and last name. Right, and then you provide an input schema. What should be the input schema that has to go to this tool? Now, this is the beauty. When you provide a tool, you can provide an exhaustive schema saying that from whatever text I'm passing as prompt, if you figure out that I have to use get owner info as a tool, make sure you hydrate the JSON following the schema and give me that input JSON when you suggest me using that tool, right? So we'll see. In this case, I'm just asking for an owner ID. The owner ID is an UUID format, and I provide a format. And this every field can have a description, and you can be as descriptive as possible with that field. And finally, I say that owner ID is the required field. The same thing I do with other tools like getting a passenger. Based on the owner ID and the input prompt, find all the passengers that will be flying along with the owner, family members, business partners, or self. And I provide what should be the input to this tool. And finally, booking a reservation. Once all of the information around to and from airports, passengers, date of travel, etc. is decided, then go ahead with booking this reservation. And since this will be a post API call for this tool, I'm passing in the body. The body should look like this. It should have the owner ID, the first name, last name, the date of departure, the date and time of departure from departure airport, from airport to airport, passengers as an array, and what are my required fields. Okay, so now let's see how it works, and then we can see the actual behavior. We can discuss on that behavior. So let me start with this. Let me execute this state machine. The one which I tested, let me start with this. Mr. John Doe, and I provide a owner ID, um, is planning for a surprise trip to Disney World. If somebody is not from US, Disney World is in Orlando, Florida, uh, with his family. I will need to book a reservation for them. The owner doesn't talk about who are the family members because
Yeah.
that information is already available to the company. The owner doesn't talk about Orlando Airport or any other airport, just talks about Disney World. And I want to fly in 5 hours from now with his family. So let's start the execution. What I do, LLMs are not smart enough to figure out current date. So I have a Lambda function that figures out today's date and time, and I pass it to the prompt saying that take this as today's date and time and figure out what are the next steps.
Isn't there actually a step functions? What do you call it? Little mini code thing which does the current time. Oh, my brain's gone fried. Anyway, I don't want to sidetrack, but
Yeah, no, I'll have to see what are the.
other
I tried with
optimization
the
bit.
intrinsic functions to
Intrinsic
see,
functions. That's what I'm
yeah,
thinking. Yeah.
current date and time, but I did not find, so I'll have to see, look at it better. So what we did not see here is it recursively called Bedrock more than 3 times. But what we can do in step functions console is we can see the event view and we can go from here. So let me see if I can look at how many times Bedrock is called and what are the inputs that are passed. Okay. So initially we said current date and time is Tuesday, August 20th, which is today. And I append that or prepend that to the actual prompt that came in. Mr. John Doe is planning for a surprise trip to Disney World in 5 hours. I'll need to book a reservation. So that was the first call to Bedrock. Now Bedrock decided and came back with this response: task succeeded. Bedrock will come back and says, okay, let me gather the necessary information to book a reservation for Mr. John Doe's surprise trip to Disney World in 5 hours. And it suggests that the first tool that you have to call is get owner's info. It did not call for me.
Mm.
It just told me that you have to call this or you have to use this tool. That's why tool use. You have to use this tool to move to next step. And the powerful part, it actually figured out what should be the input, right? And then the most important link in as part of this response is the stop reason. Since I'm using Claude, the stop reason mentioned here is tool use. So it's saying that I'm telling you to use this tool. I'm not going to stop until you use this tool. So the stop reason is tool use. So next step is the ownership is on me or the app to go and actually use the tool. The other critical part here, see, if the input token was 960, but the output token was 113, so it's way less than
Very
what
small.
was sent in, which means I can append and actually make it like a converse API and pass on this token back and build a set of messages and go from there. So this was Bedrock's response from the first call. Now I go and call the get owners info, and I provide as much information as I can.
So that's
And
in another Lambda function, just calling the
yeah,
Bedrock API.
yeah. No, this is get owners
Oh
function,
yeah,
which actually calls
calls
the
the
internal
it
API.
gets owner API.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In this case, it is just I'll show you what that Lambda function does. It's pretty simple Lambda function. I've canned some information. uh, I think you are not looking at the step functions or the Lambda
Yeah, I'm
functions
looking at the step
page.
functions one, not the Lambda one.
Okay, hold on, let me get that Lambda function and then I'll show you
Well, I
to
mean,
use
basically, that's just it's a normal Lambda function calling an internal API. In fact, there's nothing GenAI related with
yeah,
that or
yeah,
LLM related with that at all.
that's correct. So this Lambda function is basically CAD information. I'm just sending static data saying that first name John, last name Doe, home airport is JFK.
It would be calling your airports or your customer relational database with your the ID of the that sort of unique ID of the user, and
Yeah,
saying, give me information about the user, their home, airport, first and last name. Okay, yeah, that
exactly,
makes sense.
exactly. And then I prepare that response and I reconcile that message and I send it back to Bedrock model. There is a particular format in which I have to reconcile that message and send it to Bedrock. But I'll show you here how does Bedrock take that example when I call it next recursively. So when I invoke the next time, once I get the information about the owner, and I say that you got all this information, now this is what I got from this is what you passed as the user. This is what the tool that Bedrock suggested me
Yeah.
to use. Now, as a user, I'm providing you the tool result. What is the tool result? That's the output from the Lambda function. And I have to use this tool use ID. So whatever tool use ID was provided earlier by Bedrock, I have to correlate that and send back the response that I got from the Lambda function. That way, Bedrock model can correlate with the response that I got from tool A. In this case, I'm getting the response with the first and last name and all the information. So this is what it goes as an input to the second invocation. When it comes back, Bedrock would say, based on the owner information, the departure airport will be JFK in New York. So it figured out the home airport is New York. To determine the destination airport for Disney World Orlando International Airport, I did not talk about Orlando International Airport altogether.
Yeah.
That's where the power of LLM comes into picture. When it figured out where Disney World is, it got the airport code for Orlando, and that is the closest major airport. And for the travel date, since it's currently Tuesday so and so, and the need to depart in 5 hours, the departure date and time will be Wednesday, August 21st, 10:37 a.m. UTC. Okay. So, and then after getting this, it says the next tool that you need to call is get passengers. Again, get passengers is a canned information where I have family information with a wife and two daughters with their age, first name, last name, and their home airport as well. Okay. Now, once it gets gives the information about passenger, you have to go and call get passengers, send back that information, and feed it back to recursively to the Bedrock model. In this case, I say that okay, you have to go and feed it back to the Bedrock model and get the booking part. Once you it gets to the booking, you will see the payload for the booking will be hold on, task succeed. Yep, this is the payload for the booking. So ultimately, when it got all the passenger information, the airports, the time, and then it fits everything in the input, saying that this is the input. First name is John, last name is Doe, from JFK to MCO. The date, the passengers with their first name, last name, Jill, Jane, and Jenny. And then now you have to go and call book reservation as the tool.
Mm.
So you just take this input and make your book reservation call. Ultimately, when you are actually booking that reservation, You grab the last response, and the key details will be given, saying that John Doe with passenger so and so are flying from JFK to Orlando. Please confirm if this reservation booking for Doe family looks correct based on provided information. And ultimately, it'll say stop reason is end turn. There are no more tools to use. So this is the final terminal response. The in the whole entirety, the output token size never went above 200. So that's the critical part. So in the state machine, how would it look like? The way I have designed the success state in the end, it should come back and uh, send this response back to the user, whatever we just saw in the last one.
Mm.
This is the summary. And if you want to go ahead with this, either you click on confirm or say confirm, and then the reservation will be booked. Now, this is powerful, but I'll show you one more thing which is much more powerful. So I did not change anything with the definition, but now if I execute the state machine by just saying, this time John Doe is planning for a surprise trip to Disney World in 5 hours with his younger daughter. So remember I mentioned in passengers payload, I have provided age. My guess was when I built this is if I provide some context information like this, younger daughter, older daughter, just the wife or the son, with large language model, it should be able to figure out who the younger daughter is in the list. This is the most powerful part. So when I execute the state machine, it should go through the same set of steps, but in the passenger array that we saw, I should only see the younger daughter's name. Right? That becomes the power of where you can use LLM
Yeah.
and actually the internal applications. So if we see the response, or let me see the response from book reservation, it only has the
Jenny
passenger
Doe.
Jerry Doe.
Cool. Yeah, that is. I mean, that's really, dynamics. Doing it as a schema. You're defining your schema, connecting to an API, and building up a JSON object, but with cool stuff of being able to, younger, older. You're not writing greater than or less than or doing these whole complicated mathematical things to try and think of every possible thing. Your LLM is just doing that intelligence for you.
That's correct. And this is just a simple use case to show how you can use large language models to convert a non-structured data to something as structured as this. But the power is when you define the schema while you're defining the tool, you can go to a level to exactly define how should the JSON payload look like. The large language model will try its best to hydrate that payload as input. And you can imagine if you just extract this functionality out of this whole private aviation, this itself is a powerful functionality.
Yeah.
Think about use cases where you have PDF documents with a lot of verbiage, lot of text which is of no use. It's just lying somewhere in the archive or somewhere in Glacier. Now suddenly you can convert them to specific structured JSON formats, which can be fed into APIs for more data validations or more data scientific use cases. So this, I believe, is really cool, and this was only possible to visualize and build very efficiently because I chose to use step functions and function calling instead of agents. So if you in the audience, if you're trying to use function calling and see this as an example, this is a great way to start exploring and talking to your peers at how powerful this is.
Yeah, there's so many sort of threads to pick on over here, because you can think of one of the important things of when you create an API is having that API schema available, and that's often just in documentation, or it could be if you are a bit more advanced in a Swagger document or that kind of thing. But how useful would that be is even before calling an API, you're just able to say, oh, can I get your schema first, please? And then before I call the API, I know this is your schema, this is what you're expecting. Let me go and I'll fill in that information. And an LLM would be great at that. And a coder would do that, but that would take a huge amount of time. And if that schema ever changed, your code breaks. Well, actually, this is in effect generating the input payload based on whatever schema you define, and if that schema is being updated or something from documentation or Swagger, your code actually won't break with the schema update, because it's just gonna evolve. That is very powerful.
It is. Yeah, this is just a use case which is close to my heart, but you can imagine whichever industry this can be used, and whichever utility that can be used. The one of the utility that you mentioned is adhering to specs. Other utility I can think of is you get business requirements, and you want to somehow that fluid business requirement has to be converted to a structured format, and you can do this dynamically instead of eyeballing and figuring out what should be the payload. Right? So yeah,
and I
that's
think
the
there's another
nature.
interesting thread here about how tools are going to advance in the future when GenAI, when currently you have an API for your application, and you've got to register your API, you need to know which API to call, but and you need to then have that API registered within your organization as something to call. But I think it is going to be super interesting when you're going to have a list of tools available, registered in your organization.
Yeah.
And an LLM model or Bedrock or something is going to be able to call your get tools API to find out all tools you have in your organization, and then say, I hear you have a tool which is a customer tool, or you have a tool which is a jet tool, or a customer tool, or a restaurant tool, or any kind of thing, or allergies kind of tool, or anything. And your LLMs are going to be able to dynamically pick the best tool for the job and just go and get the info.
That's correct. And with step function, you can have human in the loop approval process. The other aspect is, if you are using this way, and each of those three boxes with get owner info, get passengers, and booking reservation is a Lambda function, but it can be an API that you can call internally that is running on your private data centers. Like if you have not moved on to cloud yet, but you want to, but you want to get the power of large language models or generative AI and still use what is running internally in not on cloud but in private data centers, you can still do that. So this is a bridge. Step functions provides you that bridge to actually have a Lambda function which acts as a proxy to call your internal APIs.
Yeah, and you are sort of getting out of that black box, and also because step functions is very visual. I always love that part about step functions, that we're looking through the interactions and the workflows. You click on a green box and you look at your input and output. It's so much easier to troubleshoot things that are going wrong. And I appreciate, some people may say, oh yes, but step functions is a black box. And that's true for how step functions works itself. But all your workflows and the way you consume step functions is highly visible and highly open, because you can view exactly all the steps that are happening. I think some people in my mind aren't able to separate the running of the service and the utility that the service gives you.
So this exactly answers that question. It's not a black box. In this particular use case, where agent abstracts away a lot of stuff, this actually opens up a lot of stuff for you in a really good way, which is very centric towards solutions architecture and not just not towards infrastructure provisioning. So you don't worry about how to run this workflow, but worry about how should this workflow be designed and how should it behave. So it's more of a behavioral thing that opens up instead of the provisioning part of how should step functions be run. So jokingly I say, in this use case, tool used with step functions is like EKS anywhere compared to agents, where you can actually run this. You can visually see what exactly is happening and how this interaction happens back when you do this recursion. So I personally find this very, very powerful both from serverless standpoint, where you get troubleshooting efficiently, visualization, and logging and observability around it, and you also get the best side of generative AI. So it's a amalgamation of both of them in a really good way.
And I think it's just showing the power of step functions. I talk to a lot of developers who love the idea of workflows, but they're so used to writing it in code and just aren't aware of step functions. And I think, step functions is one of these services in AWS that people really from the outside may not understand its power, but once they delve into it, we have a lot of people who are super excited about step functions because they just see the power of what they can do. I mean, internal AWS teams build a huge amount of things on step functions as well, because they also know this kind of visibility and, being able to troubleshoot is really good. Debas says, hi, thanks for joining us again. So, would it be more appropriate to say step functions workflow is more transparent than agents and LLMs? Or is it a bit of a nuance to say that it is more transparent, but it's still using the LLMs in the background, but not quite an agentic approach?
Yeah. At this point of time, if you take Bedrock agents, this is how you can answer this question, but I'm not sure what comes in future because the world of generative AI and large language models keep on improving. You might have something like this in Bedrock agents natively available. I'm not sure about that. But at this point of time, yes, to answer the question, and I have mentioned that in the blog as well, Debash, is it provides you more transparency and more control. That's the word I want to use. Coming from a financial services customers standpoint, where customers would need more control, but the niceties of both the worlds, serverless and GenAI, this would be a really good solution where it provides that control and level of transparency, level of visibility, and troubleshooting mechanisms.
Excellent. Well, Dhiraj, thanks so much. I love the wisdom. Just before we do say a proper goodbye, up next week, same time, same place, on the 27th of August, we have got serverless guru Vadim Kazulkin, who knows more about Java than most people I know, but he also is an expert on the data API with Aurora Serverless. So Aurora Serverless is something, bizarrely, we actually haven't covered on Serverless Office Hours. So I'm super looking forward to learning from Vadim next week, at the same time, same place, across our 3 different channels. And don't forget that also there is GoToEDA Day, Warsaw, 19th of September. If you are in Europe, Warsaw's a lovely city. It's also good for you, better for your budget than other EDA days when we've had it in London. I know, because I live in London. So yeah, that'll be great to see you. Don't forget reInvent. Dhiraj is going to be there. You can have a conversation with Dhiraj about GenAI and agents and all these kind of things. Imagine that. You can do that in person. And Dhiraj has got talks coming up. It's all going to be in the reInvent catalog soonish, so you're going to be able to see what we're all up to. And don't forget serverlessland.com, your one-stop shop for all info about various serverless services, links to workshops and code, and serverless patterns and snippets and repos and a whole bunch of stuff. So that's also a huge amount of information. But that's it for today. Dhiraj, I really appreciate you taking the time. In fact, here's a good question from Kunar Panami. Is it possible to get a recording of the session? All of these sessions are automatically recorded. So literally as soon as I hit the end stream, it's available on YouTube and on LinkedIn and via Twitch. So yeah, there's no such separate thing as a recording. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question for you. That's just available natively within the different streaming platforms. So Dhiraj, thanks so much for your time, and thanks to everybody else for watching.
Thank you for having me, Julian. It is wonderful to be back at Serverless Office Hours anytime.
Absolute pleasure. I'm sure we'll have you again soon. So thank you. Thanks to Dhiraj, and thanks everybody else for joining us.